Hello and welcome to the AgCulture Podcast, where we cultivate tomorrow by inspiring agripreneurs and ag innovators through real-life perspectives in agriculture. I'm Paul Windemuller, your host on this journey of exploration and growth. On today's episode, I had the opportunity to catch up with a friend of mine who is a 2024 Nuffield Scholar from England. Now, David and I met earlier this spring at the Contemporary Scholars Conference that we had in Brazil. He was actually my roommate for part of the week, so I got to know David pretty good and got to hear what he was up to in England. He's originally from a dairy farm, which we recorded this episode at his family's dairy farm, where he has also started a new business. And David is the very first entrepreneur that I had on this podcast that is farming insects. So it's going to be an interesting episode for many people today that have not heard of farming insects, but you'll understand why David is doing that and what he's hoping to accomplish in this new venture of his. Take a listen. I know you're going to enjoy this episode. David's a great guy, a very smart guy, and had a great time hanging out with him for a day. So without further ado, here's the episode with David Tavernor. Hey everyone, before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors, Bank Barn. I love these guys and what they're doing to streamline banking and agriculture. They're helping to connect farmers and lenders so that today's farmers have more options no matter the size of operation. Check out bankbarn.io to learn more. David Tavernor, welcome to the AgCulture Podcast. It's so good to have you and so good to be here today. We're at David's farm recording this in the UK. In what town?
Market Drayton, Shropshire.
All right. For those of you from the UK, you'll probably know where that is. For the rest of you, it's in the western part of, Central UK?
West Midlands. Yeah,
West Midlands. Yep. And today we're going to be talking about David's innovative business that he's started here. We're at his family's dairy farm, and I had the privilege of staying with David the last day or two here, and he's been showing me around the countryside and showing me what he's been working on. So, David, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me on, Paul, and pleasure to have you here in sunny Shropshire. Right? It hasn't been too sunny this year.
Like West Michigan, so I'm used to it. David, so you are a fellow Nuffield scholar along with myself. We met down in Brazil, like several other of our people that we had on the podcast in the past. Tell us a little bit about your background and your Nuffield project, if you want to start there.
Sure, yeah. So I grew up here on the family dairy farm. My dad is actually a Nuffield scholar from a little over 20 years ago. He went to New Zealand, studied the grassland dairy farming over there, brought it back to the UK and really grew his business from that. I then went to university in Newcastle up north, studied agribusiness. Then from there, with a bit of travelling and a gap year, then worked for Tesco, a supermarket here in the UK, as a buyer. I was buying all sorts of things, started in beer, then went to sauces and then ended up in vegetables, which I spent most of my time buying vegetables for Tesco. After that, I started working for a startup called GoPuff, an American company from Philadelphia. Crazy valuations of about $15 billion.
Wow.
It's a quick delivery company where you go on your app in an urban centre and order your groceries, and then they'll turn up at your door in 20 minutes. Had loads of pandemic demand, and then quickly, as soon as shops are open again, the demand fell away, and it was really high hopes, and it was a rags to riches to rags story again. So worked for them and had huge aspirations to be part of their journey. And when it crashed, I lasted 9 months before I was made redundant. So this was a real rags to riches to rags again story, where lots of pandemic demand was all kind of false, to be honest. And so they crashed back to reality and I was made redundant. Yeah. And that was really the catalyst for me to go and follow my dreams, which was to run my own innovative startup business. And because of my experience in farming, agribusiness at uni, in the food supply chain at retail, and all the network that I've grown as a result of it, I thought doing something in agriculture or food is what I wanted to do. And I've been kind of following the journey of insects as a feed source and a protein for livestock for it was ever since traveling, really. And I saw people in Mexico, and this is before I started Tesco, I saw people in Mexico eating insects on the side of the street, which I thought was gross. Why would you do that? You know, from our culture, we don't do that.
Right.
And it was chapalinas, which is grasshoppers in the local lingo. Tried some, full of spices and herbs and all of the rest of it, and salt. So it's kind of masked the taste, but they were nice. And it really made me think. And that's where I got the idea and got into the rabbit hole that actually there's an industry for livestock feed, not just human feed, food. And when I got made redundant from GoPuff, I thought, this is the catalyst now. I'm going to go back to find a small corner of concrete on the family dairy farm to start this dream, bought a few shipping containers and started learning how to grow insects.
And it's really easy, right?
It seems easy, yeah. I mean, watching it on YouTube when I was planning they make it look easy. And when I started it took me a whole year just understanding how to get the moisture content right, or how not to suffocate the larvae. I mean, I was telling you when I was showing you around yesterday, how I walked in one day when I thought I'd understood how to grow insects. And so I really started to ramp up production. Then I went and 3 or 4 days later, I went back into the room where I'm rearing them and opened the door, and this big waft of ammonia hit me, burnt my eyes, and it was really hot as well. You're meant to keep them, or I keep the thermostat at 28 degrees, so it shouldn't ever drop below 28 degrees. And I never got a maximum because here in the UK, it doesn't really go over that temperature, apart from the odd extreme T. And I walked in, the temperature was at 40 degrees. So I left the door open just to cool it down and get the ammonia out. And I just overloaded, I'd overpopulated the shipping container and each individual box with insects that they grew so big and created all of that heat energy that it stressed them out too much, and they all wanted to crawl out of those individual boxes, and it kind of snowballs with more heat and it makes it worse. It's kind of a weird evolutionary quirk of them, that too many of them and they start to try and run away from each other. And they were all up the walls, all over the ceiling. It was pretty horrific. I picked up 50 kilos from the floor in that
They had
day.
crawled out of the container.
Exactly, yeah. And they were raining on me because they were crawling on over the ceiling and everything. It was a pretty horrific day.
Sounds like any other type of farming, right?
Yeah,
all these things that, it looks so easy, but the nuances that really make a big difference and make it work or make it not work.
Exactly. And that's, in my view, my learning of how farming is. You're dealing with nature and biology. You're not dealing with a tech system where you can have a load of tech nerds coding away and figuring out the problems and the complexities of biology. It's far more complex, I think. And that's what you've got to mix, in my view, data with intuition, I think. And that intuition you don't get unless you actually go and do it yourself and learn it.
Right. All right. So David, you got to the point where you started your experiment, you started your insect farm, and then you decided to do Nuffield. So you want to talk to us a little bit about what your specific project that you're working on in Nuffield is and why you chose to do Nuffield.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't think you've had an insect farmer on your podcast before.
You are the first.
Yes. There we go. So it's pretty fundamental, to be honest. It's black soldier fly farming. How, essentially, how do you do it?
The how-to.
Exactly. And so I've more or less completed my scholarship now. We went to Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
We were there together, and then I did everything from there, and I didn't return home for 4 months. I went from Brazil. I did South America. I then went to US and Canada, and then bits of Europe, South Africa, and then East Africa. And what like I said, what I'm trying to find out is how do you do it? So it's looking at business strategy, it's looking at the fundamentals. It's not looking particularly at the technicalities, because I believe that there's bigger gains to be had in working out the right model. And there's lots of things I've found, and for me, now that I'm a producer in the UK, or I want to enable production as well in the UK, is how do you take all of the learnings from around the world and apply it to a UK context?
Okay.
A good example of this would be in Canada. I saw a company out there called Infinite Harvest Technologies, and they are based in Niagara. They take a lot of waste from the vegetable and production out there and process it into black soldier flies, and then they get fertilizer and protein out of it. But that's not the main revenue stream for them. It's the waste processing, because those vegetable growers pay tipping fees to landfill. So instead of that, they can give it to black soldier flies, and he is enabling that. In the UK, that is not necessarily a model that would work, because you don't have as high tipping fees here. You have a lot more biogas, which recycles the nutrients, and so it's taking a lot of these learnings and focusing your business and creating a business model based on where you are.
So what did that make you decide to do here for your business model looking forward? Are you, if you would be willing to share that with us?
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm doing here with my company, Fly to Feed, at the moment, it's very sort of in the testing stage, I suppose. I have 3 shipping containers where I'm breeding and rearing, and I'm selling the insects to the local broiler chicken farmer as live insects to enrich his chickens. Early results show, and this is just one batch of insects being fed to his chickens over one shed. It was 50 kilos of insects a day fed to his shed of 12,000 chickens. So it was only 1.5% of his feed intake, and they grew 8% more. Now I'm pretty conscious that there's only one data set, but where feed conversion, if you can improve your feed conversion by 1% in that industry,
it's a huge gain.
It's gold dust. Yeah. I'm talking more than that. And that's where the value is. And one thing I've learned from the people I've spoken to around the world is that if you start playing in the soy game and fish meal, essentially commodities, where the price is king, you're going to get eaten alive. You're never going to be able to build a business, and not in the next 10 years anyway, in my opinion. So you've got to find those value add opportunities, where in this world, in insects, I think there's loads, because it's a novel way of production. There's lots of softer benefits as well, like the narrative you tell and the welfare benefits for chickens eating them, or the sustainability benefits as well. And there's those kind of stories you tell to sell it, but then also the nutrition is that you get, as I said, growing the chickens bigger, better, faster, stronger, and you can really add value to your selling price, and you can work on higher margins whilst you're producing lower amounts. And in my view, that is the stairway to scale, to then in 10 years' time, when you've got the scale, but you've also developed the industry and the supply chain, the expertise, and who's working together, to then thinking, right, okay, can we compete with soy now? Can we really drive the costs down together and collectively as an industry, where we can compete with soy? Because ultimately, I think most insect farmers are getting into this because they see a food system where we are importing soy from South America. A lot of it is farmed sustainably, and a lot of it isn't. And it's difficult to ascertain which is which. There's a lot of deforestation going on, but there is a lot of good farming going on as well. But if we can look at producing domestically the protein, particularly here in Europe, where we don't have that soy production, which is such a good protein for livestock, and it's farmed economically as well. But if you can replace that, then you're solving a food security issue, you're solving a nutrition problem, and then a sustainability piece as well. There's lots
very
of
circular system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately where I would like to get to as an insect farmer, is to be part of that puzzle for changing the food system.
Yeah. So besides the grubs themselves from the black soldier flies, you also have a byproduct that's produced, right?
Yep.
So you want to talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and what you see in the future for that?
Yes. So the byproduct is something called frass, which is insect excrement. It also has a lot of the exoskeletons from the insects, which have a lot of chitin in them. Chitin is this compound found in things like shellfish, which commonly known as the insects of the sea. And if you spread that on your plants, not only will you get all of the nutrients, the macronutrients from the insect frass, but you get the chitin, and that acts as a natural pesticide. Put it on plants. Plants will think there's insects around. I need to defend myself from these incoming swarm of insects. So it detracts them from the plant. So it acts as like a natural vaccine, which is pretty cool. Needs a lot of refining and studying to see what is the right way to apply it, mix it, all of those kind of things. But it's something really interesting. And actually, I think with all of the movement into regenerative farming and looking at how do we reduce our chemical usage, something like frass it's a really interesting one. And I'm still unsure what the byproduct is. Is it the protein or is it the frass?
Yeah.
The frass has got.
It could be very valuable.
It could be really valuable.
Could you make a tea that you'd spray over the plants?
Yeah,
with the frass.
Yeah. I was working with someone to create this, and he did some trials. It's too early to tell what the output of those trials, but you can mix it with loads of things to really add value, but potentially reduce the cost as well, I suppose, to dilute and just get the right portion. So it depends on who your customer is. If they're looking for an organic fertilizer that suits their economical needs, or if you're looking for in garden centres, for example, you can add a lot of value and sell this really sustainable product to customers who are looking to just a little amount for their gardens every year, not spending too much, but they want to do it in the right way.
Right. So obviously every business has its challenge. What have been the big obstacles and biggest challenges that you've faced so far in your journey as an entrepreneur?
Paying myself.
The cash flow crunch, right?
The cash flow, yeah. And I've been helping out on the dairy farm just to pay myself a bit of salary. I've been doing some consulting work on more around the when I worked in retail, advising companies on their retail strategy.
Okay.
So it's nothing to do with insects, but I am, now that I've had a round the world trip and spoken to over 50 black soldier fly farms, I don't know anyone else who's been to 10 farms, let alone 50.
Yeah.
So I'm also launching a consulting business for black soldier flies. So I don't mind shamelessly plugging myself in that regard. But look, cash flow is a challenge because it's a startup business. But I've applied to some grants as well to help me with my innovation and what I'm going to be doing going forward. And what are the challenges? I guess the big ones is just understanding how these insects operate. And this is completely underestimated by myself at the start of my journey, but by everyone else trying to go into it. It is really, really tough to get going and understand how insects work. It's not like you're a chicken farmer and you're thinking, right, I want to get into turkeys now. There's something similar there. Or, you're a cow farmer and you're going into sheep, or I don't know, different crops. Insects has never been farmed in the past. At scale. At scale for protein. And so we don't know anything about insects comparatively. And that there has been the challenge, I think. And, I kind of alluded to those stories of insects raining on me in the containers. Those kinds of stories is everyone I've spoken to has gone through something similar like that.
Yeah. So in 5 to 10 years' time, where do you see Fly to Feed?
I would really like to be both a leader in the UK industry for black soldier fly protein, fertilizer, waste processing. They're the three kind of avenues. I don't know how it's going to get there. There's so many opportunities within it, and I'm currently post Nuffield going through the motions of identifying which business model I want to take forward, and I've got a few different ideas. But then I would also like to be an advocate for the industry, whether that's encouraging people into it, enabling people to getting into the industry, but also leading in regulation and the direction of the industry as well. Because I think there's so much potential here. There really is. And the more people I speak to, they come to me and say, oh, I hear more and more about this. I see more in the news and things like that. So that there is a growing momentum in this space, but there are regulatory hurdles that are holding it back. And I think there probably will be for 10 years. And that's really important for shaping the industry, but also from a business model strategy point of view, in my view, there's a lot of people potentially going down the wrong way.
Okay.
That I would like to, and I'd like to guide people to go down the right way. Because look, if someone in, I don't know, Spain or Malaysia or the US, if someone high profile fails, that impacts the whole industry. And we're not competitors, not right now anyway.
Right.
We're competing with soya or chemical fertilizers or whoever it might be. So we need to build ourselves up as an industry together. Yeah,
that's a great way to look at it. A lot of people would probably still have that competitive mindset and not want to share their secrets, not want to work collaboratively. But as you've been around the world, how has that collaboration been reciprocated to you?
Yeah, I mean, people who have opened their doors, that's the immediate reciprocation. And look, some people have been so open. But equally, I have had pushback as well from some people, and it has been, and from who I've spoken to about the industry, the last 12, 13 years is basically the lifespan of the industry.
Okay,
it's gone through primary school.
yeah, very new, very
yes, exactly, and it started off extremely secretive, where people didn't want to share, and it was a lot of venture capitalists funded businesses out there. And I think if I'm being completely candid, from my view, I think the secrecy has come from them. Okay. That's how their industries work. And that's fine. If they want to have their IP and take it, great. But then if their business fails, that all of those secrets are lost. And that's only going to harm the industry. If we want to grow together, if we want to grow as individuals, we need to grow together.
Mm. Yeah, very good perspective. So, David, on the technical side of things, what you saw on your travels, was there any really neat, like, oh, that's an idea I'm going to take home? That's something that would be that's going to change my business.
Yeah, there was. We talk about in our Nuffield community of there's always a Nuffield moment where you just stand there and you're kind of, you don't talk for 10 minutes because you think this is incredible. Now, I genuinely think this happened many, many times on my travels. And there's so many creative individuals out there and businesses. But to name one or two, this one's really interesting that, so the insects, it's the maggots that you're farming. Yeah. They will, from their natural behavior, they will crawl out of their feed when they're finished eating. And it's at that point, or maybe it's around that point when you want to be feeding them to the insects. And so how do you harness this natural behavior rather than manually moving insects about, separating them, all of these kinds of things? And this is really similar to what my dad is doing on the farm and my brother. They have a grassland farming model where they milk the cows. When the cows are done, they leave the parlour and they'll just walk along the tracks until they get to the field. It's just what cows do. It's a herd mentality. And then they'll eat the feed, and then when they're ready to come back to the farm, to the parlour, they've been conditioned to think, right, I'll walk back to the parlour. And they will do that. So how can you do that with insects? Can you entice or set up systems where they will self-harvest themselves. And this is really interesting because labour is one of the big costs, especially in Europe, where labour is more expensive than places like where I went in Africa. And actually, they're doing it in Africa. So how can you encourage that kind of system? And there's lots of different places I went where they're integrating the technology of or integrating the insect production systems into existing agricultural or existing manufacturing businesses, and so how can you tap into that rather than just setting up a standalone factory where you're importing all of the feed from miles around, or you're exporting your products from miles around? How can you bolt on your farms to a waste producer, be it a food factory or a council that's producing food waste from the town?
Yep.
So how can you bolt onto those systems so that you're not moving things too far? And I think that's where we've got to be really smart to attach our production onto existing systems rather than making the supply chain yourself, because I think if you do that, you're going to fail.
And you're going to fail because the cost structure of the business is just going to be too high, or
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it goes back to the point of competing with commodities. When you get to that level, you've really, really, really got to reduce the costs down. And if I was to dissect the costs of just producing the live insects in Europe, you're kind of splitting it down fairly evenly into the cost of the eggs or input of eggs, the cost of the feed input, the labour, and then the energy required to heat your insects and ventilate them.
Mm.
And then you've got further costs on top of that. If you're going to kill them, dry them and process them into a meal and oil and all of those kind of components, that's added cost. And,
right.
And so when you're adding all of this up, then you've got to add your revenue up even higher. And so if you're integrating them into your existing systems, you can share energy, or you can share labor, or kind of eliminate labor if you're self-harvesting.
Right.
But all of these things, I've got to learn myself. And that's what I'm going to go through the process now over the next 6 to 12 months is come up with those. And I'm going to be applying for a grant as well to help fund some of this innovation. Luckily in the UK, we have a lot of grants, and that's another kind of learning and a quirk of the UK. Yeah, it's going to cost more to produce it, but we've got the demand. Whereas in Africa, it costs far less. The labour is available, and it's a lot cheaper than here. The energy, they just use the sun.
Right.
Luckily, we've got the sun today, but this is definitely not an accurate picture of what the UK is like. It's usually very cloudy, but they have low cost, but they don't have the demand. If they want to get a higher price, they ship the demand off.
Yeah,
or ship the product off. Sorry.
So before we finish up, I just want to ask you: have there been any other big takeaways outside of the Black Soldier Farm side of things? Any other big takeaways that you've had as you've traveled around the world the last 4 months?
Yeah, I mean, traveling around the world, you gain so much confidence. I was a different person from when I started, and just even having the audacity to go and knock on someone's door and say, "Can I have a look around for a couple of hours?" That kind of silly things like that comes to you. And
I tried that at Eaton Hall the other day. That didn't work, but
keep knocking. They'll answer.
That was the Duke of Westminster's house.
Yeah, they might answer with some aggression, but
yeah.
and telling you to go.
They politely told me to leave.
yeah. But I mean, this is more of a personal takeaway, but probably the best learning I got from the whole of Nuffield. I was staying with another Nuffield scholar in Ontario, Canada, and we went to what they do locally in rural Ontario, a buck and doe party, where it was essentially they hired out a community village hall, and you pay to go, and it's for someone's wedding. It's like a fundraiser, right? Fundraiser for a wedding, and there's a raffle there, and food and drink, and they got, as Canadians, they got an ice hockey puck and sticks out.
Of course,
you had to swipe it into like a washing machine on the wall, which I was bloody awful at. I was probably doing a cricket shot more than anything. being from the UK. And that was probably the biggest learning of all my Nuffield, like how to fundraise for your wedding. It's a genius idea.
Which is something that you'll be doing in the near future here, right?
Yeah.
So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Got engaged on my travels with my now fiance, Katie.
On the top of Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa.
Kilimanjaro.
Yeah, that's another story for another day. But yeah, it was a great story as well. So,
yeah.
Great. Well, David, thank you so much for hosting me here at your farm, and enjoyed seeing the insect farm, the black soldier fly farm. Check out the social media pages. I took some pictures and some videos yesterday as we were walking around, and David was showing me his operation. So I'll be posting those on our social media pages. And until next week, this has been David Tavernor, and I'm the host, Paul Windemuller of AgCulture Podcast. Thank you. Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you're as fascinated by what David is doing as I was. I really enjoyed getting to see his operation and the prototype that he set up that he's now going to scale. So if you are interested in checking out those videos and pictures, make sure to check out the AgCulture Podcast website and the Facebook and LinkedIn pages, as well as my own personal pages. I will have other posts from my 1-month travel throughout Europe for my Nuffield Scholars Program. Check out those posts. And as always, if you found value out of this episode, out of this podcast, please share it with somebody that you know. That's how we grow our audience. So again, thank you for listening. And until next week, I'm Paul Windemuller, and this has been the AgCulture Podcast.